Careful to step back there. So what I'm going to do is briefly do a market update, cover the Innovation Award Program, and an update on what's on our ROI research. I think most of you know IDC has a lot of analysts around the world. Here's the different activities we do. We do attempt to track everything sold every quarter. The new thing that we have added here last year, or 2 years ago, was the whole big data HPDA program. But our group is now also doing cybersecurity as a new addition to the group, because we're seeing a lot of big data and HPC being injected into cybersecurity environments. Here's some recent government studies. The nice thing about most of the government studies is the results are available for the community as a whole. So as they complete, we'll be glad to provide that to everyone. The one that should be completed about the end of September is for the National Science Foundation. It's best practices in government and industry partnerships around the world. We're also doing our third cybersecurity study. Bob Sorensen will be doing an update on one of those, I believe, later today. So we have just a whole list of different ones, and I'll spend a little time on the ROI study that we're doing today. So as far as market update, in 2015, the market actually grew more than we expected. It landed $11.4 billion. The supercomputer segment's at $3.3 billion, which is a good high number, but it's lower than what it was a couple years ago on the supercomputer side. So some of the top trends here, as I mentioned, we saw actually 11% growth in revenues at the end of the day. 2016 is looking fairly strong, but right now we're expecting 2016 in the traditional 6% growth rate, maybe 5-6, because 2015 was so high. In all our market data, there has to be a buyer and seller. So if somebody builds their own system, we don't count that in our market data because there hasn't been a market transaction. And the new largest machine in the world, which is $330 million roughly, was self-built. In other words, the government funded one organization to build a machine, so you won't see that $330 million in our numbers. And that causes the growth rate to be a bit lower than that. The HPDA area, I think you've seen this chart a couple times. We're just reminding everyone, we've added 4 new verticals to our data tracking, and that's really its HPDA segments. Now, a lot of big data things are in the traditional modeling and simulation. So those fall in our regular categories, like whether it's automotive, aerospace, bio, life sciences. But these are the new categories we have as far as fraud and anomaly detection, marketing, and business intelligence. And in these cases, these are all areas where you're using both big data and high-performance computing together. That's our definition of HPDA. So here's how the market turned out as far as the different industrial sectors. You can see it was very robust as far as for a number of the segments here. Bio, life sciences, and CAE are doing considerably well right now. I mean, really healthy growth there. And the traditional government labs, university, and defense are doing very strong also. Now, here's the big change here, and of course, in the last couple months, even more changes here as far as the vendor changes with HP buying SGI. But some major shifts that are taking place here. IBM selling off its x86 business to Lenovo was a major shift that we saw over the last couple of years. But the biggest concern we have is if you take IBM's size as of 4 years ago and the combined IBM and Lenovo today, there's about 10 market share points that have been lost in that whole transitional period. And it's, of course, HP picked up quite a bit, but Craze picked up, and all the other vendors have picked up, a fair amount of market share. And the Chinese vendors are doing extremely well. The other thing I should mention, in the other category, we're tracking right now, I believe, around 34 different vendors in the other category. The way our rules work is a vendor has to tell us it's okay to show their numbers publicly. So sometimes you'll see a vendor show up on our list, and then the next year you'll see them disappear. It's when the vendors asked us not to show their numbers. And in general, that means their numbers weren't as good as they wanted to see them. On a processor side, of course, x86 is doing extremely well right now. x86 is more than 90% of the market. The vector processors there are from NEC, who are still building some vector machines. The RISC Blue Gene, of course, ended in 2013, was the last installations of the Blue Gene processors. We're looking forward to see ARM show up on this chart sometime in the near future. And then on forecasts, why are we still projecting HPC to be a strong growth market? And what I mean by strong growth is if you look at all servers in general, they're growing on the order of 1 to 3% a year in that realm. HPC is growing generally between 6, 7, 8%. although HPC is very lumpy. But one reason is the lower half of the market is finally back to recovery mode. The lower half of the market still is not at its 2008 levels. So there's still room for a lot of growth there. It has become a very competitive weapon for the large centers, for competitors as far as an industry. And we're seeing the government procurements still growing dramatically, but what's going on there is they tend to lump together. So you see a big growth, and then you see a kind of quiet period, which we're hopefully at the end of right now as opposed to in the middle of, and then you see another spike taking place. And I believe over the next 6 months you're going to see a lot of announcements about what we think is going to be a major buy period. We think 2018 to 2020, in those 3 years, there will be just some massive spending are going to be taking place again. So here's our forecast right now. We are projecting about a 10% growth in the supercomputer segment. The one thing I always mention is the supercomputer segment, because those top 4 or 5 machines are causing a real roller coaster effect. Depending on which endpoints you pick, I can show supercomputers growing at 4% or 35% right now. And in some cases, we actually can show it almost at 60%, just depending on which endpoints you take. So we do a fair amount of time here to try to average that in the numbers. But we are forecasting right now roughly about just below 8% growth rate for the next 5 years. Now, everything I've talked about so far is the server side. On the storage, middleware application, and repair services, this is our forecast. At the moment, the highest growth rate part of the market continues to be storage. And the part that we still are struggling trying to figure out, and I've said this now for 2 years, is the storage portion is growing. There's much more purchases of it, but the storage vendors are not making much money and being as successful as we'd like to see. And we're trying to figure out what's going on with that dynamic. Originally we thought there was massive growth and a lot of competition and price cutting, but still growth, and eventually that would settle out. We're hoping that this year might be that settling out period, but we're trying to figure that part of the market out. So as I mentioned earlier, storage is the fastest growing segment right now. They keep hitting record levels, every time we run the numbers. We are just launching our end-user MultiClient study. That's one where we do a large number of sites. We normally try to survey over 1,000 different systems, usually across 150 sites or so, and that's where we get the heavy tracking. And we just have some of the initial results coming back from that, and it still shows that the storage portion is growing very strongly. So in conclusion on the forecast section is we still expect it to be a strong growth market. The vendor share position shifted greatly in 2015, and we expect it's going to continue shifting some because the HP acquisition of SGI and the IBM Lenovo mix, we're not sure that that's settled out at this point in time.